came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Please be seated.
I hope it is that you were able to get one of those handouts. My man Andy has left me this afternoon, and that's okay. If you didn't, they're up back there on that little podium. Help yourself to them. We've been looking through that scarlet thread of redemption that runs from the book of Genesis throughout the entirety of the Bible, where God lays out His plan seamlessly for us. And at times, we think we can't find Him in certain books, but He's right there. Every verse drips with the blood of Jesus the Christ. And as you and I look at the book of Daniel, it's not any different. The key words are dominion, sovereignty, and triumph. The key verse, I get to assign that one, so it's whatever one I think would be, I guess, Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44. The key phrase there is the Most High ruleth. The key chapter, I think, of course, is chapter 2. It deals with the dream that the Babylonian king had, and it deals with the looking forward to the establishment of the church found in Acts chapter 2. The main theme of Daniel is the universal sovereignty of God. The appeal of this book is the authority of God, and that He has that authority everywhere. There's not a place on this earth that He doesn't have it. Daniel's name means God is my judge. Daniel was one of 4, at least in this book that we read of, who were taken away into Babylonian captivity. Now, for me to stand up here and foolishly say there were 4, well, then that would discount everyone else who was taken into captivity at that time. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah all go into captivity in 606 BC because, anybody know? They're in the line of royalty. Those 3 carryings of weight, 606 and 586 and whatever the next one was, go and they're carried away in order of importance to their particular society. And so with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah taken away, it's noted that they're royalty. All right, so Daniel's 3 friends and his teens were outstanding in their character. We're going to see that in just a moment. This book is probably the greatest account of a godly man in a godless nation. Does that seem familiar to you? It keeps getting closer and closer every day, doesn't it? The book of Daniel teaches 2 things that have never been taught by the prophets. One, it teaches about angels in Daniel 3, 6, 9, 10, and 12, and it talks about the resurrection of the dead in Daniel chapter 12. And there is a distinct difference between the child of God and the pagan in the day of Daniel, not only then, but also today. If you were to speak to a Jewish person who was Orthodox, that would mean they are all the way in and they are Jewish and want to follow that Old Testament just as much as they can, they would understand the phraseology Jesus would use in the New Testament when He says they have Moses and the prophets. They would speak of the Psalms and the prophets. They'd speak of the law and the prophets. You know, there was a 4th division that the Jewish people had in their books. They had the law, they had the poetry, they had the prophets, and then they had a group called other writings. Daniel was placed in, how many of you say, we'll take a quick poll, how many of you say the prophets? This is not a trick question. You're going to have to vote on something. All right, who say the prophets? That's a good guess because that's where he is now, right? Who say the other writings? Who's only saying that because that just seems like something you shouldn't say? Yeah, Drew's admitting that. I don't know why I'm saying that. It just sounds good, right? They really put him in the other writings. And here's why. Let's compare Daniel and Jonah for a moment. Jonah is in the prophets because Jonah is a patriot. You see, Jonah doesn't like Nineveh. He doesn't like the people in Nineveh. Jonah really hopes that God will destroy Nineveh. Jonah doesn't want to go preach to them. He doesn't want to go give them the opportunity that God would give them to be saved. He wants everything bad to happen to them. Now contrast that with Daniel, who spends from the captivity throughout his entire life, as far as we know, in Babylonian captivity, seemingly getting along with them and seemingly living a life that would be profitable for the Jewish nation, although they can't see it. And a life that would be profitable for these pagan people to see God. What the average Jewish person would say would be, Jonah was a patriot and Daniel was a traitor. And so we're going to put him in the other writings. We can't dispel the fact that what he was writing is biblically accurate, is sound, is inspired of God. But we just don't like him. What a sad fact. Because in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 2, and in Daniel chapter 6, you see at least 3 points in Daniel's life where what he did counted for something. In Daniel chapter 1 and verse number 1 that Michael read for us just a moment ago, that gives us some background of what happens when Daniel and his friends are taken into captivity. It's about the time Jehoiakim is reigning, and I'm not sure that's exactly right. I think the word reign there has been kind of changed over the years. The word would point us more toward this would be his third year of servitude. This is going to be the first time that Nebuchadnezzar comes to the throne, Nebuchadnezzar the second. Obviously, Nebuchadnezzar the first dies. Nebuchadnezzar the second comes to the throne. This would be the third year that Jehoiakim was in captivity, and it's been a while since the children have been too. The young men, in verse number 4, they've shown themselves to be pretty smart fellows. Well, in chapter 2, we see it's further down the line of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. In chapter 6, what we find is a guy that you don't read anywhere other than right here in Daniel chapter 6 as ever being in a position of authority, Darius. What you're seeing in Daniel is the change of the Babylonian Empire into the Medo-Persian Empire. When it gets to Darius in Daniel chapter 6, Darius is a Mede. It's not going to take very long before the Medes and the Persians join together and have their own world power. What do we find in these 3 chapters? This is going to be real easy for you. Are you ready? Here's the entire lesson in one sentence. You can't go into the lion's den and have the king worried about you all night without having a life that would prove that. That's it. You can't go into that world and that relationship and have a Gentile king worried about this Jewish slave without living a life that would prove that. He starts from Daniel chapter 1 and he begins. In Daniel chapter 1, he makes a deal of changing food. Who cares? It's just food, right? And you say, well, no, it's certain kinds of food because he's on a diet from God. Yeah, but not really, right? It's just food. It's not that big of a deal, right? Hey, are you guys awake? It's not that big of a deal, right? It's just food. Well, it is that big of a deal, isn't it? It's big enough deal for Daniel to say, something has to change. I cannot eat this food. Why? Because God is still in control. Why does that point need to be made even especially today? Well, look around. You see all those voids that are around you that were filled this morning? That's why. I mean, we're here, it's just food. It's just spiritual food, right? Imagine if I took my youngest daughter, who would still squeak by into that age group, to Miss Julia's clinic. And I said, I don't know what's wrong with her. She's just losing weight. At 15, that's not a great thing, is it? We feed her, but she's just losing weight. Is she getting enough sleep? Sure. Is she doing the proper medications and the proper vitamins? Sure, yeah. All that kind of stuff's good. What does she eat? Well, she eats steak, and she eats potatoes like everybody else. She eats all these kinds of things. How many times do you feed her? One time a week for 30 minutes? Now, that would border on the edge of child abuse, would it not? But it's just food. Where are the rest? Jesus would say it this way, where are the 9? Didn't I heal 10 of you lepers? Where are the 9? And here's the fact. Some people attend in worship service to be fed, and some people attend because it's expected. We have to figure out which one we are. Are we attending because we want to be fed, or are we attending because because that's what is expected? Well, the drop-off would tell us which one is which. Here you have in the book of Daniel a man who is questioning simple menu changes. Look, maybe he gets a chance to have fried catfish. Daniel's never had the opportunity to have fried catfish. You know, if you put those with some hush puppies and some French fries, you've really got something. And I don't know if you know this or not, there's a miracle called malt vinegar. If you'll put a little bit of that on there, you've really got something. Daniel didn't know anything about that. Is that what was offered to him? I don't know. I know that was what was restricted. Maybe he was offered some nice pulled pork. Can't have that. Maybe he was offered a BLT. He can't have that. If he doesn't start in chapter 1 defending his faith, he never makes it to the lion's den. I have a cousin who is a high school baseball, basketball, football coach, all of the above. And when he was playing sports in high school, he always made sure to let his coaches know that he would not be available on Sundays or Wednesdays to play. One, I think he meant that. Two, I know his daddy really meant that. And here's what he told us as he grew up and was a coach and had a few babies of his own and lived in a household and understood what his daddy was trying to teach him. If you ever change it one time, the coach has you every time. Every time. So if Daniel never stands up in Daniel chapter 1, he never makes it to the lion's den. If he doesn't start that life of defending what God would say is proper here, they have him. Daniel chapter 2. We move over a little further and we see him growing and being understood by others. And there's a problem that comes up that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. The only problem is he doesn't remember what it was and he doesn't know what it means. And they said, if you'll just tell us what it is, we'll tell you what it means. Sure, I can do that. Tell me what your dream was about. If you tell me what your dream is, I'll tell you what it's about. I can make up all kinds of stuff, right? If you ever read about those things online, about what does this mean in my dream, seems like 9 times out of 10, they're making stuff up anyway. He has to interpret the dream, but first tell him what the dream was. And as he goes and does that, he begins to build a reputation. He's beginning to be seen as different from those in authority rather than the same old cookie cutter smart guy, but just that guy. He's beginning to build a reputation. He's beginning to set himself apart. Notice his declaration that he gives. As he's speaking about this this statue. He begins to tell them about a statue that's 4 pieces, basically, a head of gold and a chest of silver and a belly and thighs of brass and some iron at the bottom there. He said these are going to represent these 4 kingdoms that are coming. And while all of those things happening, while they're rising and falling, there comes one in verse number 44. This is, I think, why this is our key verse. He says, in the days of these kings, as he's already talked about the iron there, he said, the days of these kings shall God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break into pieces and consume those kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Well, what kingdom's he talking about? Daniel is speaking about things in an eternal perspective, and yet Nebuchadnezzar's trying to figure out which one of these kingdoms is going to break off and destroy all these other kingdoms. What's he doing? He is building a relationship with Nebuchadnezzar that's going to say to him and to all those in charge, I'm going to shoot you straight. I'm going to tell you what has to be told, and chances are you may not like it sometimes. Chances are you may not agree with it sometimes, but the truth, as my mother would say, will stand when the world is on fire. And so we make it to chapter 6. Here you have a man who has begun defending God, a man who is building a reputation, and then a man in a lion's den. 83 years old. He's about 83 years old. Now, I'm not going to ask this. You know what? Yes, I am. Anybody in here 83? All right. Whew. I dodged that bullet. Any of you in your mind thinking, I'm kind of close? Well, what if they said, what we're going to do is put you down in a lion's den where the lions haven't been fed, but you're going to be the food for them. And they're kind of snappy when you get down there. I wouldn't try to pet them. What do? Would you hightail it for the borders of the state just as quickly as you possibly could? As I think that's what I would do. Well, how much is it going to cost me in gas? Well, it's not going to cost me death. I think I run for the border as quickly as I possibly could. What does Daniel do? Daniel says, okay. What's his terrible crime? The same thing he's been doing for about 67 years there. The same thing he's been doing for, did you hear this? About 67 years. His high crime is prayer. His starting point was menu. His building of a reputation all revolves around a rock. And his high crime in Babylon is prayer. So Darius puts him down in there. And then stays at what I see in my mind as a manhole cover, waiting for the night to pass to see if Daniel's okay. What if those lions would have just ripped him to shreds as soon as his toe touched the rock down beneath? Would that make God any less powerful? Would that make Daniel any less correct in what he did? No. But it didn't happen that way. You see, when Daniel went down there, God stopped the mouths of those lions. For what reason? I don't think it was to teach a lesson to Daniel. Daniel already had that lesson. Daniel has that lesson well in hand when he walks into Babylon, or else he never would have started with the menu. Darius learned something, doesn't he? Can you imagine how many people were touched and affected by Daniel living like a child of God among the heathen? without him ever fighting for a menu, he never makes it to a lion's den. So where do you start? Where do you, as a child of God, start? Turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. Or Hebrews chapter 11, I'm sorry. You think this has absolutely nothing to do with Daniel. I've read Hebrews chapter 12 100,000 times. I've never seen Daniel's name in there. You're exactly right. You never have. Verse 36, others had trials of cruel mocking and scourging, moreover bonds and imprisonments. And I'm 3 verses too low. Let's go to 32. What shall I say more? Time would fail me to speak of Gideon, of Barak, Samson, Jephthah, Samson, or Barak, and Samson and Jephthah, also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises. And then there's Daniel. Right there, verse number 33, stopped the mouth of lions. When we look at the book of Hebrews, especially chapter 11, we look at those men and women of faith who we can look at and strengthen our faith. Look at the entire book of Daniel. Strengthen your faith. Pick a starting point. Did his have to be menu? No, but it has to be somewhere. And then fight for God and not give up an inch. You want to live like Daniel? You want to live like his friends who would not bow? Pick a spot and dig in, because the fight's coming. Be prepared. Be kind. But don't you move off of truth. That's the book of Daniel. Here I am in a captive place where I am all alone. And guess what? God's still God. And I can still serve Him, being His child amongst the heathen, because I'm His child. See, Daniel has a pedigree that most of us would love to have, to be the child of God. Daniel's pedigree and his bloodline is at a point to where we would look at that and be envious. That I wish I could do that. Great news for you. You can. Just as he was a child of God then, you can be a child of God now in the exact same way. You can hear what God has to say, believe those things, repent of your sin, confess that Jesus is the Christ. You can be baptized in water for the remission of your sins. You can be raised to walk in a newness of life, and you can be adopted into the family of God right now. Right now, you can have exactly what Daniel had. There's only one problem. Sometimes we get tired or frustrated, aggravated, or a number of other things, upset, and we let the heathen world creep into the child of God's world. And as we look at ourselves in the mirror of the gospel, we know that that can't be. You think David, or Daniel rather, over 67 years was ever frustrated in that place? I think that starts day one. And I think that frustration probably ran with him for 67 years. While he may have been frustrated and at times upset and aggravated, he never lost faithfulness. There's your key. There's your key. Be frustrated. Be aggravated with the world who doesn't see the goodness of the gospel, but don't lose your faithfulness over it. Don't compromise your eternity for theirs. Teach them the way. Show them what they're missing. Look at your life every day in that mirror of the gospel. See if it holds up. If not, stand up, dust yourself off, get out of that hog pen, come back home. Right now, while we stand and sing.